Hey guys, tonight we drift into the mists of Yunnan, a land where mountains rise like walls and rivers carve silver threads across deep valleys. Imagine standing on a ridge where clouds roll beneath your feet, so thick they seem like oceans of milk. The Kingdom of Dali once lived in this place, hidden in highlands so remote that only the brave or the foolish dared to wander. And since you're here with me tonight, you're either brave, foolish, or maybe just too sleepy to tell the difference. Either way, you probably wouldn't survive the altitude if you tried this without a good jacket. So let's keep this trip imaginary. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk through a landscape that seems almost painted. Steep ridges cloaked in pine, narrow fields carved into terraces, and a vast lake shimmering below like a polished mirror. This is High Lake, one of the great jewels of Yunnan and the heart of the Dali kingdom. Around you, the Kangshan Mountains loom like guardians, their peaks draped in mist that refuses to lift, as though the clouds themselves want to keep secrets from you. A fact here is clear. By the 10th century, the Kingdom of Dali had emerged as a true regional power, controlling trade between China, Tibet, and Southeast Asia. It was no hidden village, it was a bustling crossroads. And yet, step by step, as you wander along narrow stone paths, you sense how isolated it feels, high above the lowlands. In the air there's a curious scent, pine mixed with burning incense. Shrines stand by the road, their roofs curling upward like dragon tails. A woman leaves an offering of fruit, and for a fleeting second you wonder if she's hoping the local gods can protect her from bandits, or maybe from her neighbor's noisy chickens. Yes, even in a kingdom in the clouds, chickens find ways to ruin your morning peace. Historians still argue whether the Dali kings ruled with firm hands or let their ministers run the show. Records are thin, like parchment worn by too much sunlight. What remains, though, is the sense of a people who adapted to mountains instead of bending them, villages clinging to cliffs, markets held by lake shores, boats skimming the water like swans. You step into Dali's old city, and though centuries have passed, the streets hum with echoes, merchants shouting prices, horses stamping, bells chiming as monks file through. The walls are painted white, trimmed with black patterns that resemble waves or clouds, a style that will survive long after the kingdom itself vanishes. And here's a quirky tidbit. Local folklore claims the clouds around Dali are alive, drifting with moods. Some mornings they gather tight and heavy, warning farmers not to plant. Other days they scatter like a flock of sheep, promising luck. Science would tell you it's just weather patterns, but let's be honest. Moody clouds makes a better bedtime story. You move past an arched gate, the stone worn smooth by centuries of hands, and find yourself in a courtyard where a storyteller once spun tales. He spoke of emperors far away in the north who barely knew this place existed, and yet depended on its trade. He spoke of warriors who once crossed these valleys, their armor glinting like mirrors under the sun. He might even have warned, with a sly smile, that if you linger too long in the mists, you might forget the path home. The night deepens around you, Lamps flicker in niches along the walls. Somewhere, a lute strums gently, the notes floating upward to mingle with the ever-present clouds. You lean against cool stone, listening. Above, the stars fight to break through the mist, but most lose the battle. It's fitting. This is a place where earth and sky blur, where kingdoms rise not from endless plains, but from mountaintops that seem closer to heaven than to any empire. And if you're starting to feel a little lightheaded from all this altitude, don't worry, you're not alone. Even seasoned travelers joked about Yunnan's air. One old account claims that visitors drank extra tea not for hospitality, but just to keep from fainting on the spot. Good advice, really, though probably less fun if you're hoping for wine. So here you stand, at the threshold of the Dali kingdom, where clouds form walls and lakes form mirrors, and where every stone path feels like it might lead to a forgotten story. The air is quiet, but behind that quiet is a kingdom ready to show itself. If you're willing to keep walking into the mist, you walk further into the misty ridges, and the silence carries an echo from a time before Dali. To understand this kingdom, you have to feel the ground beneath your feet layered with older footsteps. The soil here remembers Nanzhao, the powerful state that once ruled Yunnan between the 8th and 9th centuries. Its story isn't carved into marble palaces. It's hidden in valleys and caves, whispered by wind and carried downriver. A fact you can hold on to: Nanzhao was a federation of 6 tribes, united under one ruler, and at its height it was a rival of Tang China. They weren't a minor band tucked away in mountains. They fielded armies, conquered neighbors, and built a capital with walls that could awe visiting envoys. But as you wander, you don't see walls. You see hills rolling into mist, each one a reminder that kingdoms here have always had to bend to the landscape. Historians still argue whether Nanzhao fell more from internal strife or outside invasion. Some claim their rulers grew too fond of grand palaces and neglected the people, while others suggest that Tang China's campaigns weakened them beyond repair. Either way, the federation dissolved, and out of its ashes rose new tribes and new leaders, seeds that would grow into Dali. You pause by a ruined stone stela, half buried in moss, its characters fading into nonsense swirls. Maybe it once proclaimed victories. Maybe it was just an old tax record. Honestly, given how governments love paperwork, I wouldn't be shocked if it was the medieval equivalent of a receipt. Still, the weight of it lingers. Someone thought it mattered enough to carve in stone. The quirky tale comes from the legends of Nanzhao kings, who supposedly commanded sorcerers. They say one ruler had shamans summon storms to shatter enemy armies, while another rode into battle with a flock of crows circling above, taken as a sign of divine favor. Whether those crows were actual omens or just opportunistic birds hoping for dropped snacks, well, I'll let you decide. You step onto an old trade road, and the stones feel slick under your shoes, worn by centuries of hooves and carts. This road carried salt, tea, and horses from Tibet down into Yunnan, and silk moving the other way. In the distance, the faint sound of a bell seems to echo from a mule caravan that once trudged through here. You imagine the smell of leather, hay, and sweat, and suddenly realize, yeah, ancient trade wasn't glamorous. Profitable, yes, but definitely smelly. The world you walk in is not just political, it's spiritual. Nanzhao was famous for its Buddhist monasteries, some built into caves with murals still glowing faintly after 12 centuries. You imagine monks chanting in low tones, their voices vibrating against stone walls, the air thick with candle smoke. And outside, local villagers still clung to animist traditions, whispering prayers to mountain spirits and lake deities. A kingdom built in clouds needed both divine approval and practical irrigation. Then the story darkens. You hear echoes of Nanzhao's campaigns, armies marching north into Tang territory. Records say they once captured thousands, even sacked the great city of Chengdu. You walk along a riverbank, and though the water flows quietly now, the thought flickers. Armies once camped here, fires lining the shore, their smoke blending with mountain fog. The quiet doesn't erase what happened. It only hides it under soft layers of time. You climb a stone stair carved into a cliff. Each step feels older than memory. At the top, you reach a small platform where a shrine once stood. The view spreads wide, mountains fading into clouds, valleys dotted with villages. It's easy to see why a king would claim divine mandate up here. It feels like standing closer to heaven, or at least closer to the clouds, which, let's be honest, can be mistaken for the same thing if you're a little too sleep-deprived. Somewhere below, you hear a flute. The notes are uneven, drifting in and out of tune, like a beginner's practice. It reminds you that history isn't only kings and wars. It's also people learning songs, cooking dinners, gossiping about neighbors, and grumbling about taxes. In fact, if you listen carefully enough, you might almost hear someone from centuries ago complaining about the exact same problems people still complain about now. The Nanzhao era ends in shadows. Its rulers vanish from the chronicles, its palaces crumble into dust. But not everything fades. The people remain, the roads remain, and the mountain passes remember. Out of that quiet persistence, a new leader will rise soon. You walk down from the shrine, the mist gathering tighter, and sense that the next page of this story is waiting just ahead, hidden behind the clouds. You follow the winding road down from the misty shrine, and the path delivers you into a valley where whispers of change stir. The Nanzhao Federation has crumbled, its last kings fading into obscurity, and for decades this land has fractured into petty realms. Each valley seems to crown its own lord, each pass its own tax collector. You walk among villages where farmers shrug at the mention of kings. After all, no ruler seems to last longer than a season of rice. But in the mid-10th century, a new figure begins to rise, Duan Siping. A fact is clear. He was a local official under one of the smaller regimes, and in the year 937, he seized the moment. The story goes that he interpreted an omen, words written in the shape of characters on a sheet of paper carried by the wind, that urged him to take power. Whether it was fate or just creative marketing, he rallied support, toppled rivals, and declared himself the founding king of the Dali kingdom. Historians still argue whether his coup was carefully planned or a stroke of luck. Some describe him as a strategist who united fractious lords with a vision of stability. Others paint him as an opportunist who happened to be standing in the right place when rivals stumbled. Either way, you can't deny the result. A new dynasty born in the clouds. You walk into Dali City, where the foundation stones of Duan's capital still lie. The streets run in straight grids, a sign of deliberate planning. Carved gates rise tall, painted with patterns of cranes and lotuses, symbols of longevity and purity. The capital isn't massive compared to Chang'an or Kaifeng, but perched here in Yunnan, surrounded by mountains and lakes, it feels like a fortress blessed by nature itself. A quirky tidbit pops up in local lore. Duan Siping supposedly consulted a geomancer who told him the perfect spot for his palace was shaped like a phoenix resting by the lake. He built his court there, hoping to draw down heavenly favor. It worked, at least for a time, though one might suspect the real advantage was simply being near good farmland and a defensible ridge. Still, palace on Phoenix's back has a nicer ring to it than palace near adequate soil quality. The streets buzz in your imagination. You hear hawkers selling tea bricks, lacquer bowls, salt and silks dyed in deep indigo. Monks chant by temple gates, their robes fluttering in the lake breeze. Fishermen haul nets heavy with carp, joking loudly about how kings may rule, but fish still bite where they please. Humor, you notice, is eternal. At the palace, banners snap in the wind. Duan Siping sits on a carved throne, the hall smoky with incense. His officials kneel, their robes a patchwork of colors reflecting tribal diversity, Bai, Yi, and other groups who now recognize his rule. His crown isn't as grand as an emperor's up north, but the message is clear. Yunnan is no longer a broken patchwork. It is Dali. You step outside, and the sun hits Erhai Lake just right, turning it into liquid gold. Boats skim across, carrying rice, tea, and sometimes soldiers. The kingdom may look peaceful, but its rulers are careful. To the north lies the Song dynasty, a giant whose shadow stretches far. To the west are Tibet and the steppes. Dali's survival will depend on keeping its balance, like walking across a rope bridge that sways in the mountain wind. As you walk through fields outside the capital, farmers bend over in rows, planting rice. Children chase each other between terraces, their laughter echoing off the hills. It feels stable, almost idyllic, but history reminds you that no kingdom in this region could ever take peace for granted. Still, for tonight, you let yourself imagine this land as it was, reborn, united, and poised for centuries of survival. And just as you pause to admire the scenery, a rooster crows so loud it startles you back. You sigh. It seems that no matter how grand a kingdom becomes, the local poultry union never takes a day off. The mist closes again, and you sense the story isn't finished. The kingdom has risen, but power must now be dressed in marble, ceremony, and faith. You keep walking, waiting to see what kind of palace waits in the clouds. You pass beneath an arched gate painted with curling cloud motifs, and ahead lies the seat of kings. Dali's palace complex spreads across terraces that slope gently toward Erhai Lake, as though the royal halls themselves lean down to drink from the waters. The stone under your feet is cool, polished by centuries of sandals and boots, while high walls rise whitewashed and edged with black designs that seem to ripple like waves. The fact to anchor yourself with. Dali's capital, with its palace and temples, became a major political and cultural center of Yunnan from the 10th through 13th centuries. It was not a village outpost. It rivaled other regional cities in scale and influence. You walk into a courtyard where carved marble pillars gleam pale against the dark timber roofs. The halls stretch long, their beams painted with lotuses, cranes, and clouds, symbols of harmony and long life. Inside, court scribes once bent over bamboo slips and paper scrolls, their brushes whispering across inkstones. You almost hear the scratchy rhythm as they recorded edicts, or maybe just doodled dragons when nobody was looking. The throne room sits deeper still, a grand hall lit by shafts of daylight filtering through lattice windows. On a raised dais rests the seat of Duan's successors, a throne carved from dark wood, inlaid with silver patterns that shimmer faintly. Ministers once crowded here, robes dragging across stone, voices rising and falling in endless debates. And in the middle of it all, the king listened, weighed, and decided, or at least pretended to, when he wasn't distracted by a particularly juicy palace rumor. Historians still argue whether the Duan kings truly ruled with authority, or whether real power fell into the hands of Buddhist clerics and influential ministers. Some records hint that the monarchs were more like ceremonial figureheads, while abbots and advisors directed policy. Others insist the kings held firm command, guiding Dali through centuries of relative stability. Either way, the palace stands as the theater where decisions, or at least performances of decisions, were staged. You climb marble steps to a terrace. From here, the view stretches across Erhai Lake, with fishing boats gliding like specks of silver, and beyond them, the misty ridges of the Kangshan Range. The capital feels less like a city and more like a balcony gazing into eternity. You half expect to see a dragon coil down from the clouds just to check in on palace affairs. Here's a quirky detail. The palace was so famed for its white marble that travelers compared it to a city built of snow. Marble from local quarries, paved halls, framed gates, and adorned balustrades. Some even said the glare on a bright day was strong enough to give a man a headache. So if you ever visit in your imagination, sunglasses are highly recommended. You wander into quieter quarters where courtiers once lived. Kitchens bustle in your mind's eye, steam rising from cauldrons of rice, servants carrying trays of tea, and the occasional cook cursing loudly when he drops a pot. No kingdom, however lofty, can run without a well-fed staff. The smell of fried garlic and ginger drifts faintly through your imagination, reminding you that power and appetite always keep close company. At night, the palace shifts mood. Lanterns glow in rows along covered walkways, their light painting soft gold across polished floors. The sound of zithers drifts from a chamber, fingers plucking strings in slow patterns, meant to soothe courtiers after long debates. You imagine strolling past, catching the faintest strains of melody, as though the palace itself hums a lullaby to calm its restless politics. Then you notice a mural, faded but still alive with color. A king flanked by attendants, his robes sweeping to the floor, a halo of clouds above his head. The image is less history than aspiration, but it speaks loudly. Here in Dali, kings wanted to be remembered as both earthly rulers and heavenly mediators. The palace was their ladder to the skies. You leave the hall, stepping again into cool air. The clouds gather lower, brushing the roof tiles as though to remind you that no stone, however carved, can resist the passing of time. And just as you start to feel the weight of centuries pressing close, a palace cat darts across your path. Yes, even here, where kings once ruled and marble gleamed, cats still patrol, indifferent guardians of empty thrones. The night grows heavier. You glance back at the glowing halls, then forward to the temples that rise beyond. Marble and banners alone cannot hold a kingdom together. Faith must walk hand in hand with power. So you keep moving past the palace and toward the sacred peaks where incense curls into the sky. You leave the marble halls behind and follow the sound of temple bells. Their tones roll out across the lake, echoing against cliffs, soft yet commanding. The path narrows into stone steps lined with lanterns, each glowing like a star fallen low to earth. At the top rises a temple roof, curved like a swallow's wings, the tiles glazed with green that shimmers even in shadow. A fact is simple here. The Kingdom of Dali became renowned for its religious pluralism, with Buddhism as the dominant faith, yet Taoism and local animist traditions coexisting side by side. Kings often styled themselves as patrons of Buddhism, commissioning temples and statues to project both piety and legitimacy. You step into a courtyard where incense burns in thick coils, hanging from rafters and filling the air with sweet smoke. Monks in saffron robes shuffle by, chanting sutras in low voices. Their rhythm feels like a tide, steady and endless. To one side, a Taoist priest stands before a small shrine, adjusting offerings of fruit and rice. And not far away, a villager ties a red ribbon to a tree branch, whispering prayers to a mountain spirit. Faith here is not exclusive. It is layered, like the terraces of rice fields that spill down the hills. Historians still argue whether Buddhism in Dali flowed mainly from Tibetan influence, Chinese transmission, or unique local developments. Some say Dali kings were heavily influenced by Tibetan models, adopting rituals and monastic hierarchies. Others suggest they leaned closer to Chinese Chan traditions, importing sutras and temple styles from the East. What is certain is that by the 12th century, Buddhist temples had become the spiritual backbone of the kingdom. One quirky tidbit glimmers through the smoke. Dali was home to the famous 3 pagodas, which still stand today. Local legend claims they were built to pin down a dragon lurking beneath the lake. Apparently, the dragon had a nasty habit of stirring storms, and the pagodas acted as giant stone nails, keeping it from thrashing. Whether you buy that or not, it does explain why the towers point so confidently into the sky, as if daring the beast to move. Inside one temple hall, a colossal Buddha sits cross-legged, its calm gaze fixed ahead. Candles flicker at its feet, their flames small compared to the giant presence above. You look up, and in the dim light, the face seems alive, smiling faintly, or perhaps watching to see if your mind is still restless. Around you, pilgrims bow, leaving coins, fruit, and paper charms. For a moment, the centuries dissolve. You could be anyone, at any time, standing here in the same cloud of incense. You wander outside, where a smaller shrine leans against the mountain slope. Here, villagers have left bundles of herbs, wooden carvings, and even a few chickens, alive and grumpy, tied to posts. These are offerings to local spirits, guardians of the streams and ridges. You can't help but think that if you were a spirit, you'd much prefer fruit or coins to being handed a squawking rooster. But traditions have their own logic. The bells strike again, and night begins to fall. Lanterns flicker along the temple walls, their light mixing with fireflies drifting lazily through the air. Somewhere in the distance, a drum beats slowly, calling monks to evening rituals. You listen, lulled by the rhythm, and feel how faith has always been not just about belief, but about sound, smell, and repetition, sensations that bind a community more tightly than words ever could. A monk passes by, smiling faintly, and you wonder if he knows how many kings once came here seeking blessings. Some rulers may have hoped for long reigns, others for victory in battles. And yet, here among incense and chants, ambition dissolves into quiet. Even kings must bow, even if they straighten up a little faster than everyone else. The temple doors close softly behind you. Clouds slip down the mountain, wrapping the roofs in silver veils. You descend the steps, carrying with you the scent of incense and the faint thought that belief is less about answering questions and more about keeping them alive. And just as you reach the bottom, you spot a goat nibbling at an unattended offering basket. Sacred or not, even a goat knows a free snack when it sees one. You walk from the temple's fading incense into the bustle of a market street, where the sounds of trade ripple like music. Bells jingle on mule harnesses. Merchants call out prices in voices that sound more like songs than bargaining. The air is thick with scents. Dried tea leaves sharp as smoke, pepper that makes you sneeze, and the unmistakable aroma of fried dough sizzling in oil. A fact to steady yourself with. The Dali kingdom sat at the crossroads of trade, linking the Silk Road in the north, the Tea-Horse Road through Tibet, and southern routes into Southeast Asia. Its prosperity came not only from farming the fertile valleys, but from guiding caravans through mountains that terrified less experienced travelers. You step aside as a train of horses passes, each loaded with slabs of tea pressed into bricks. These bricks are bound so tightly that they look like dark tiles stacked in packs. Traders swap them for Tibetan war horses, salt, and medicinal herbs. Farther along, silver glints in the sun. Dali was famous for its silver mines, and the shimmering metal fueled both currency and ornament, turning markets into showcases of wealth. Historians still argue whether Dali's role in long-distance trade rivaled the power of coastal ports or whether it was more of a regional link. Some records emphasize its influence reaching as far as India and Arabia, while others suggest its networks were strong but more localized. Either way, standing here in the market, you can feel that goods and ideas flowed in from every direction. A quirky tidbit catches your ear. Travelers once described Dali's caravans as being guided by giant mastiffs, dogs so huge they were said to scare off bandits just by existing. Imagine walking beside a horse-sized dog whose main job is glaring at potential thieves. If that doesn't make you behave, nothing will. You wander deeper into the stalls. On one table sit delicate silver hairpins shaped like blossoms. On another, jars of honey glisten like captured sunlight. A merchant thrusts a piece of candied ginger toward you, insisting you try it. And when you do, the heat makes your tongue tingle, your eyes water, and your nose suddenly very awake. You cough, and the merchant laughs, proof that even across centuries, vendors enjoy watching strangers underestimate their snacks. The clamor is not just about objects. You hear Tibetan traders haggling in deep, rolling tones, while men from further south barter in quicker, lighter syllables. Chinese merchants spread silk bolts like waterfalls, their hands sliding across fabric with reverence. Each voice adds to the chorus of exchange, and you realize trade is less about money and more about conversation, the shared rhythm of give, take, and laugh. Ahead, near the water's edge, boats bob with loads of rice, pottery, and fish packed in woven baskets. Erhai Lake serves as an inland highway, carrying goods between villages and the capital. You lean over the pier, watching ripples spread, And imagine that every wave is another transaction, small but steady, keeping the kingdom alive. Then, at dusk, the market shifts mood. Torches are lit, casting long shadows across stalls. Musicians pluck lutes while traders relax, their business done. A storyteller gathers a crowd, spinning tales of distant lands. Deserts where camels march endlessly, seas where dhows sail under triangular sails, mountains where snow never melts. You stand among the listeners, lulled by the rhythm of his voice, realizing that trade is not only goods, it is imagination carried from one place to another. The storyteller pauses for effect, then warns of bandits on mountain passes, men who take your tea before you can drink it. The crowd laughs nervously, because everyone knows it is both a joke and a truth. In these highlands, wealth always invites danger, and caravans walk a thin line between profit and peril. A donkey brays nearby, loud enough to cut through the storyteller's voice. The crowd chuckles, and the man shakes his head. "Even donkeys want to be part of the tale," he says, drawing laughter once again. You smile because you realize that humor is the one trade good no caravan ever leaves behind. As night falls, the market empties. Traders tie their goods under awnings, merchants count coins in dim light, and the air cools as clouds slip low from the mountains. You turn away, your ears still echoing with the mix of voices, your nose still buzzing from candied ginger, your eyes still filled with silver and silk, and somewhere in the distance, bells jingle once more. A caravan setting off into the dark, carrying Dali's lifeblood into lands unseen. You leave the dimming market behind and follow a narrow road where the sounds of daily life weave together like threads in a tapestry. The clanging of a blacksmith's hammer carries over the roofs, punctuated by the hiss of hot iron meeting water. Children laugh as they chase each other around terraced fields, their voices bouncing against stone walls. Somewhere close by, the faint, rhythmic sound of a loom beats like a heartbeat, steady and patient, a fact you can trust. The majority of people in the Dali kingdom were farmers, artisans, and small-scale merchants. Their labor, rice in the paddies, crafts in the workshops, and goods in the stalls, formed the foundation of the kingdom's wealth, far more than the gilded ceremonies of kings. You step into a rice terrace. Water glitters across the fields, mirrors stacked one above the other on the mountainside. Farmers bend, planting green shoots in neat rows, their feet sunk in cool mud. Hats woven from bamboo shield them from the sun, though clouds often slip down to do the job instead. The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and new growth, a reminder that power begins with soil. Historians still argue whether peasants in Dali lived under heavy burdens of tax or whether the kingdom allowed them relative freedom compared to dynasties in the north. Records are sparse, and the truth is probably both, some years harsh, others lenient. What's certain is that without the rhythm of planting and harvest, the marble halls would have been empty shells. A quirky tidbit lingers in local lore. Villagers claimed that if frogs croaked unusually loud before planting season, it was a sure sign of abundant harvest. If they stayed quiet, farmers grew uneasy, muttering that even the frogs knew something was wrong. In other words, amphibians were once the official weather forecasters. Modern science might disagree, but to be fair, the frogs were probably more accurate than some TV reports you've seen. You walk through the village square. Women squat beside baskets of vegetables. radishes, beans, and greens still damp from the fields. An old man sharpens a blade slowly, sparks jumping like fireflies. Beside him, children roll wooden hoops with sticks, giggling when the hoops wobble and crash. Their laughter echoes down lanes lined with whitewashed houses, each roof curling up at the corners like the wings of a bird. The rhythm of life here is practical yet vibrant. In workshops, potters shape clay into jars, spinning wheels with swift, practiced motions. Their hands glisten with slip, their movements calm as monks. Carpenters saw wood, the scent of pine curling into the air. Silverworkers hammer delicate patterns into ornaments, bracelets, clasps, and hairpins that will later shine in the market. Every sound feels like part of one long song, a daily symphony of survival. Evenings bring their own music. Families gather by low fires, steaming bowls of rice and vegetables before them. Dogs curl in corners, hopeful for scraps. Old stories are retold about kings, spirits, and ancestors, though always with a new twist or a clever joke slipped in by the storyteller. You imagine sitting with them, bowl in hand, nodding as though you've heard the tale before, even if you secretly haven't. One voice mentions taxes, grumbling about officials who travel from the capital to collect grain. Another mutters about the weather, which seems to conspire against good harvests. You smile quietly, realizing that centuries change many things, but not the themes of dinnertime complaints. Beyond the village, you hear drums faintly in the night, a festival stirring. Lanterns rise in the dark, carried on bamboo poles. Flutes and lutes weave lively tunes, and dancers step in circles, their feet stamping dust into rhythm. The festival honors a local spirit of the mountain, a reminder that the kingdom's calendar runs not just on harvest cycles, but on rituals binding community to land. You pause to watch children light small floating lanterns, sending them down a stream. The flames drift like a constellation broken free, carrying prayers for health and good fortune. You can't help but think that if you were a spirit, you'd probably prefer the glowing lanterns to the earlier goat offerings. More scenic, less noisy. As the night deepens, the village quiets. Fields stretch silver under the moon, the terraces gleaming like endless steps leading to the clouds. You stand on the edge of the paddies, listening to frogs croak loud enough to wake the ancestors, and you wonder if maybe they're predicting something more than weather. Maybe they're just happy to sing. You leave the lantern-lit stream and climb a lane that curls toward a quiet quarter where paper windows glow like small moons. The hammer and flute fall away. You hear a different rhythm now. Brush against silk, brush against paper. Pause, breathe, brush again. You push through a cedar gate and step into a study court where scholars sit cross-legged on woven mats, sleeves neatly folded, inkstones lined like little ponds that wait for rain. A fact sets the table. By the 12th century, Dali's monasteries and court schools anchor regional learning, with Chongsheng Temple and the 3 pagodas serving as a major religious and scholarly hub in Yunnan. Formal inscriptions and steles use Chinese characters, and Buddhist collections circulate through halls that also store legal codes and diplomatic letters. The pairing is practical. A kingdom needs both sutras and receipts. Candlelight wobbles along shelves packed with scrolls. A senior reader taps bamboo to call the room to attention. You settle near a window. Outside, Kangshan is a black wall. Inside, sound becomes thread. A novice recites a verse on impermanence. Another diagrams a sentence from a law edict, and a third memorizes a list of mountain passes where the wind throws tantrums. Everyone drinks tea. The pots keep coming like reinforcements in a siege. Sleep never gets a vote here. Historians still argue whether Dali implements a genuine civil examination system modeled on the song, or relies mostly on hereditary office and clerical recommendation. Records are thin and sometimes contradictory. You can imagine either world: anxious students cramming regulated verse, or abbots and ministers quietly nominating promising scribes who already know which drawer holds the tax rolls. In both cases, learning feels less like a ladder and more like a bridge across fog. You trace a finger over a woodblock print. The characters are crisp, their lines confident, a quiet brag from the carver. A monk explains in a calm, almost musical voice that the hall preserves commentaries on the Lotus Sutra, travel notes from envoys to the Song court, and medical recipes copied from older Nanzhao manuscripts. He smiles at an herbal page that recommends ginger for almost everything. If it doesn't help, he says, you didn't use enough ginger. That's one way to win an argument. A quirky tidbit lives in the gossip of the stacks. Some calligraphers here swear that ink ground with water taken at dawn from air-high yields strokes that never fade. Lake water at any other hour works too, of course, but apparently dawn ink carries a breath of cloud. Scientific, dubious, poetic? Absolutely. And poets get the last word more often than chemists in rooms like this. You move into an upper gallery where debate runs warmer. One group leans Chan, savoring terse sayings like hard candy. Another follows Ajali practice, esoteric Buddhism, with ritual specialists who serve villages and court alike. A Taoist visitor quotes an alchemical recipe for longevity, causing the Chan group to smile thinly, which is scholar for, "We disagree, but we brought snacks." Someone cites a Tang commentator with the kind of delight people usually reserve for dessert. You listen as ideas ping gently back and forth, a slow rally where the goal is not victory, but elegance. To frame the scene, the neutral voice clarifies. Dali's literati culture borrows forms from Tang and Song, regulated verse, parallel prose, model letters, yet fits them to local concerns. Essays praise terraces, cloud seas, and the way caravans stitch valleys into a single cloth. Temple inscriptions invoke both universal compassion and very specific requests for bridge maintenance. Scholarship breathes the same air as rice fields and mule bells. A teacher invites you to the courtyard. Moonlight pools on stone. He asks a riddle about names and things, then chuckles when your answer chases its own tail. He shrugs. Good, keep walking. Teachers everywhere love questions that behave like cats. They come when they want, leave when they like, and teach you patience by ignoring you. Back inside, a clerk unfurls a map. Thin lines crawl over ridges, dot to dot between staging posts. He reads notes in tidy columns, distances in lie, fodder stores, river depths after rain. Scholarship here is not only verse and doctrine, it is logistics, weather, and how many pack animals a pass will tolerate before the mountain complains. If a poem cannot help a caravan cross, it can at least help the clerk remember which bend floods first. Useful beauty counts. A student sidles up and whispers that he writes midnight poems to win a girl who sells silver hairpins. He shows you a couplet so earnest you can hear his heartbeat in the brush strokes. You advise a softer rhyme and maybe fewer metaphors involving horses. He nods, mortified and grateful. Love letters and border reports often share the same table here, which explains why some odes read like supply lists and some inventories sound suspiciously romantic. On a balcony, you find a small astronomer's bench, bamboo sighting tube, corded weights, a board etched with stars. He explains eclipse calculations in a voice that never rises, as if a comet might startle and fly away if he speaks too loudly. He notes that calendars must fit harvests, festivals, and treaties. A kingdom is, among other things, a schedule. When he sneezes from ink dust, he apologizes to the moon. The moon declines comment. Another corner holds medical texts, pulse charts, lists of routes, warnings about damp wind. A physician copies a remedy with the precision of a carver. He says a scholar who studies late should warm the neck and avoid drafts. You adjust your collar because you are suddenly convinced a breeze could erase your entire memory of the dynastic timeline. Preventive medicine is persuasive like that. The last bell of the night hums through the rafters. Students pack brushes, wrap scrolls, and tuck notes into sleeves. A novice bows to the Buddha, then to the dictionary. Priorities feel correct. Your legs ache from stillness. Your mind hums like a jar of bees. Not from panic, but from the pleasant shock of recognizing how thought becomes infrastructure. A road traced in ink, then walked. A law copied, then lived. A verse recited, then remembered when the clouds sit low and heavy over a field. You step outside. The court exhales. The lake lifts a faint, cold smell, silver and damp. Lamps wink along walls. Behind you, the study hall settles into its nighttime creaks, the building itself learning how to sleep. You glance up at the ridgeline and imagine tiny lights moving, late walkers or stars that forgot their job. Somewhere a fox barks, short and amused, as if teasing scholars who think the world fits inside a scroll. You walk on, pocket warm with a scrap of borrowed paper that holds a careful character you practiced under a patient eye. It is only one word, simple and spare. It feels enough. Learning rarely arrives like thunder here. It arrives as a brushstroke that does not wobble, a path you can find again in fog, a conversation that resumes tomorrow exactly where you left it. And if dawn ink truly keeps its color, the word will stay with you, steady as the lake, long after the candle gutters out. You step away from the quiet study court and follow a wall that climbs the ridge like a pale spine. Up here, the wind carries a different lesson. It does not smell of ink or tea. It tastes of iron on cold air, of old ash washed thin by rain. You pause at a crenel and look down on the lake, and the view tilts into memory. Banners along the shore, horns calling through cloud, and boots learning how to trust edges no wider than a hand. The stones under your palm feel nicked and smooth at once, as if 1,000 grips have sanded them into agreement. A neutral voice sketches the outline. Long before the calm of your walk tonight, Nanzhao's armies poured through these valleys in the 8th and 9th centuries, sometimes allied to the Tang, sometimes opposed, often in the company of Tibetan power. Their roots drilled north toward Sichuan, east toward the basins, south into what is now northern Vietnam, and west along corridors that brush the highlands of Burma and beyond. The mountains never changed, but the flags did, a fact to stand on. In 866, the Tang general Gao Pian reasserts Tang control over Annan, the Red River Delta, after years of Nanzhao pressure and occupation. That reconquest folds the region back into a Tang circuit and blunts Nanzhao's southern reach. The record is plain on dates and names, sober like an account book. Numbers sometimes outlast songs. You move along the parapet and pass a shallow niche where a relief once showed riders, in layered coats, bows angled high. The carving is worn to clouds and shadows. You fill the gaps by listening. A captain barks a simple rule to his recruits. Pace your breath with the slope, or the slope will claim the breath for itself. He demonstrates climbing without hurry, the way a mountain teaches humility to anyone who arrives wearing glory too loudly. Somewhere a soldier mutters that glory weighs more than his pack. Another answers that the pack still eats more rice. Logistics wins most arguments. Historians still argue whether the late Nanzhao offensives were driven primarily by resource strain at home, by court politics with Tibet and the Tang, or by ambitions of generals who discovered that valleys are easier to count when you stand on the next ridge. Each thesis finds witnesses in sparse lines of text. The wind refuses to testify. Beyond the wall, a gentler slope drops toward a hamlet whose name remembers a field muster. Chickens police the lane like fussy inspectors, and you try not to laugh when one pecks your shoe with institutional zeal. War and paperwork both love stamps. Feathers count. A guide leads you to an old way station where a beam still carries charcoal marks, ticks in groups of 5. He says they're march tallies scratched by a bored quartermaster who cared more about fodder than philosophy. You picture mules lined nose to tail, T-bricks strapped like armor, spears bundled like reeds. The quartermaster taps his tablet, grunts and approves an extra sack of grain when the pass turns stingy with weather. Strategy gets the poems, fodder gets the victories. A quirky tidbit whistles in from travelers' tales. Some border campaigns in the lowlands to the southwest supposedly saw war elephants, borrowed, bought, or allied, whose size unsettled horses and nerves alike. Whether Nanzhao fielded them regularly or only met them in allied contingents, the stories linger because nothing rearranges a soldier's confidence quite like a moving hill with ears. The hill also insists on a snack break. Priorities are universal. You leave the station and angle into a valley whose stream runs clear as blade light. On a bank of silt, you kneel and lift a shard of green-glazed pottery, its curve suggesting a bowl that once warmed a night on patrol. You set it back. The shard has outlived the fingers that held it, and does not need another fingerprint to prove the point. The neutral voice continues, sketching another arc. In the 820s and 830s, Nanzhao strikes into Sichuan. The name of Chengdu appears in sources shadowed by raids and sack, a reminder that the frontier is rarely where the map declares it. Lines wander, rivers wander. Armies help maps change their minds. The chronicles, cautious in tone, trace the push and pull without adjectives, which is the historian's way of letting you hear the boots. On a shoulder of the ridge, a cairn looks across 2 passes. Wind threads grass until it combs itself into silence. You imagine the night before a march, a slow bowl of millet, a check of bowstrings, the quiet ritual of tying a hair cord again, because hands want something steady to do. A drummer taps a low pattern to nest hearts into one tempo. Nobody says much. The moon minds its own business. Somewhere a comedian, because there is always one, whispers that if the enemy does not show by noon, they should bill the mountain for wasted time. The sergeant smiles without looking up. Humor is a blanket that covers cold thinking. Clouds drag their sleeves across the ridge, and the world reduces to 10 paces. You understand why commanders prized scouts who could smell the downhill side of a pass. A proverb whispers that a good scout can tell which way tea will spill before the cup moves. You add that to your list of impossible learnings and watch your feet. At the valley floor, you reach a shrine to travelers. Offerings lean in a polite clutter. Pine twigs, a twist of silk, a pebble rubbed smooth as if worry left its print. A faded painting shows a line of figures threading a cliff path like beads. A thin red line arcs overhead, perhaps a comet remembered by someone who liked red more than proportion. A monk once told people that comets warn kingdoms to tidy their ledgers and their hearts. Several kings preferred to tidy the ledgers. Hearts take longer. 2 boys rush by with reed spears and shout titles that make them generals. One appoints the other commander of snacks, a role you recognize as the most respected in any army worth its campfire. He salutes with a dried pear. The staff accepts. You climb again and find a small ward tower of stacked stone. Inside, a bundle of reeds hangs from a peg. Wind flutes for signaling. You blow one, and it answers in a thin, astonished note, like a bird who just discovered it can sing but isn't sure it wants the job. The note carries farther than your shout would. In clifftop countries, breath becomes a tool. The neutral voice ties thread to present. When Dali rises later, memory of these marches remains in place. Names in garrison ruins, in manuals copied by clerks who never saw a pass in snow, but knew which column balanced the load. The kingdom in your feet learns from the kingdom under your feet. Roads do not disappear, they wait. You rest on a warm rock and watch the shadow of a hawk slide across terraces. The hawk hunts with precision you envy, drawing perfect ovals on invisible air. A veteran once told a boy that courage is not a noise, but a position. 1 foot where it must be, then the other. The boy answered that his courage sometimes forgets. Left from right. The veteran said, that is why we march together. Wind thins. Lake light brightens. The ridge you stand on turns from echo to balcony. Somewhere a bell rings from a city gate. 3 strokes, then 2, then 1. An evening code for walls and markets and kitchens. The wars fade back into the stone. You brush the dust from your hands and look north along the line of passes where couriers ride with letters tied under lacquered seals. They head toward courts that prefer words to horns, audiences to ambushes, silk to dust. You follow their imagined route, already hearing the polite thunder of reception halls and the careful grammar of tribute lists. The mountains keep their secrets, but the envoys will try anyway, packing sentences the way a caravan packs tea, tight, valuable, and fragrant if you let them steep. You descend from the ridge into a plain where the air grows softer and the wind trades iron for lacquer. A road flattens, then widens, then sprouts milestones carved with tidy characters that promise order if you keep walking exactly as instructed. Couriers pass like clock hands, leather satchels bouncing, seals tucked under lacquer. You follow them to a border pavilion where a clerk with a brush behind his ear weighs words as carefully as he weighs tea. He asks for your name, your business, and whether your boots will leave mud on his spotless floor. You answer politely. He sighs anyway. Officials have a professional commitment to sighing. A neutral voice frames the chamber. Between the 10th and 13th centuries, Dali manages relations with great courts to the east, first the Tang's lingering prestige, then the northern song in Kaifeng, later the southern song in Yunnan, through ritual embassies, sealed letters, and predictable gifts. The pattern is familiar across East Asia: tribute presented, titles granted, trade licensed, and borders left mostly to their mountains. A fact to plant. Song histories record repeated embassies from Dali, with the court conferring honorary titles on Duan rulers and recognizing them as regional kings, while maintaining a formal hierarchy that placed the Son of Heaven at the peak. The writing is dry but steady. Envoys arrive, gifts are listed, banquets occur, and everyone signs where indicated. You cross the pavilion and watch scribes compile a manifest. Items line the floor in careful rows: tea bricks pressed with cloud motifs, silver ingots, musk sealed in horn, dyed cloth dyed deeper than midnight, carved bone combs, and the bright eye of a single jade pendant that seems to approve of itself. In exchange, the East promises silk, books, salt privileges, and a ladder of titles that climbs into rhetoric. Titles feed pride. Salt feeds people. Both matter. Historians still argue whether Dali saw itself as a subordinate vassal within a cynocentric order or an independent neighbor using the tribute vocabulary as a commercial visa. The ceremony looks identical in either interpretation, which is the great magic trick of ritual. Two meanings, one bow. The caravan rolls. You go with it, past staging posts where stew pots never cool, through Sichuan valleys that echo like long hallways, and at last into a city so layered with markets that even the air seems to have a price. In a hall of painted beams, the embassy kneels before an official who reads out the preface of welcome in a voice that has welcomed more people than a harbor has ropes. Translators hover like bridge builders. A master of ceremonies adjusts hats with the gravity of a stargazer setting a telescope. Seating follows a geometry stricter than mathematics. If you misread it, a mathematician appears to correct you. At night, a banquet unfolds. Dishes arrive in smart formation, fish bright as coins, bamboo shoots reluctant to stop being crunchy, and rice that smells of warm rain. A musician plucks a melody designed to make conversation sound clever. A poet is gently encouraged to improvise a couplet that praises mountains he has never seen. He does fine. Poets travel more than their shoes do. A quirky tidbit drifts along the table. Some court diaries mention southern envoys presenting peacock feathers and teaching a dance that imitated the bird's unfurling tail. Whether that dance truly came from Dali or from a neighbor carried along its roots is murky, but the image stuck, color from the highlands shimmering under lantern light, making officials blink as if the feathers were a new kind of argument. Between toasts, lists circulate. The song officialdom loves lists the way sailors love harbor lights. Your host discusses border passes as if they are acquaintances with moods. He calls one the sulker and another the flatterer, based on their weather. You mark that down as practical poetry. The embassy offers a memorandum about banditry in a particular gorge. The court notes it, promises patrols, and quietly wonders if a new market license might calm the gorge faster than soldiers would. Commerce is the quiet negotiator at nearly every table. The neutral voice widens the map. Dali sends and receives envoys not only with the song, but also with polities to the southwest, pagan on the Irrawaddy in some periods, Thai principalities in the northern valleys, and Tibetan domains along high corridors. The record is spotted but persistent. Strings of gifts, Buddhist texts copied and exchanged, marriages that may have linked elites across ridges. Whether these ties shaped policy or simply greased mule hooves is less clear, but the routes thicken where greetings become habit. A senior secretary shows you the registry where names of foreign envoys sit in columns. Some entries are crisp, others smudge where rain leaked. He laughs softly and says the weather edits history more often than historians do. Then he complains about the cost of paper. Accountants fear humidity, warriors fear cliffs. Everyone fears budgets. In another room, a monk interprets a diplomatic letter that flows with Buddhist metaphors. Compassion appears as a shared river. Wisdom turns into a bridge. The monk chooses phrasing that leaves neither side too beholden. You appreciate the craft. It is a kind of carpentry with nouns. If a phrase fits perfectly, nobody notices the nails. Morning returns to the courtyard. A song painter gifts the embassy a silk scroll of plum blossoms. He explains the flowers as resilience in winter. Your envoy replies with a small silver heron, worked so thin the light shows through its wings. He offers no lecture. The heron explains itself. For a moment, you feel diplomacy reaching clarity without adjectives. Then a clerk coughs and requests signatures in duplicate. The moment passes. The caravan turns home weeks later, with bolts of silk tied like quiet rainbows, and a sealed letter that drips honorifics. Rumor rides alongside. A new prefect in Sichuan with a fondness for tariffs, a court faction arguing over frontier policy, a wandering Chan teacher whose one-syllable sermons have become very popular because they are short. You file these away. Good intelligence is gossip with timestamps. Back at Dali's lake, the embassy unloads. Titles are read in the Great Hall. Banners tilt in approval. The king accepts the stylus-thin document with the face people wear when a ceremonial scroll is heavier than it looks. Gifts are dispersed to temples, officers, and warehouses that smell equally of cedar and rules. The scribe who enters the items into the ledger writes like a man paid per character. He probably is. A steward corners you to ask whether the song intends roads or indifference. You answer the only honest way. The mountains intend mountains. Policy will circle them. He nods, satisfied, because that is both unhelpful and true. Another debate brews by the gate. Some courtiers favor tightening ties eastward to protect trade. Others argue for leaning into southern neighbors, where the terrain shares a language of ridges and rivers. A practical voice points out that tea and horses do not care about theories. They want flat paths, dry straps, and inns that refill bowls. The court hums like a hive that has discovered maps are made of honey and stings. The quirky returns with a wink. A tale insists that one envoy, bored by the length of protocol, hid a tiny compass in his sleeve so he could point home during speeches and feel less lost. Whether compasses were actually in his reach at that moment is questionable. Whether speeches are long enough to inspire innovation is unquestionable. Evening drops. Lanterns line the quay, where boats deliver silk to storerooms. You stand with the water lapping and think about how power can be measured in pages as much as in spears. Ritual writes treaties into muscle memory. Merchants memorize feast days the way soldiers memorize passes. A kingdom lives in these habits. Kneel, speak, gift, answer, stamp, and then, my favorite part, eat. On the horizon, clouds pile into slow palaces. The road to the north still glows with courier dust. Behind you, a temple bell counts the hour, a sound that belongs to everyone and no one. You feel the negotiations continue in your chest, steady as breath. The mountains keep the borders honest. The letters keep the markets open. And in quiet doorways, children chase each other with paper hats shaped like crowns, ruling for 3 heartbeats at a time before trading thrones for noodles. You leave the court's busy chambers and drift back into the mountains, where politics loosens its collar and stories breathe without ceremony. Villages perch on slopes, their houses clustered like stones tossed by a giant hand. At dusk, smoke threads from chimneys, curling into shapes that locals swear are not just smoke at all, but hints of spirits rising to check on the world. A fact to anchor you. The Dali kingdom fostered a rich body of folklore and myth, blending Buddhist cosmology, Taoist ideas, and older animist traditions rooted in the Bai and other peoples of Yunnan. These tales shaped not only local ritual, but also the identity of the kingdom itself, giving texture to its place in the clouds. You wander into a clearing where children sit in a ring around an elder. His voice is low, cracked like dry bamboo, yet strong enough to reach the night air. He tells of dragons who coil in the depths of Erhai Lake, guardians of storms and givers of rain. Offerings are thrown into the water each spring, not out of fear, he insists, but out of respect. A lake that feeds you deserves a meal now and then, he says with a wink, which makes the children laugh nervously and glance at their half-empty baskets. Historians still argue whether such dragon myths originated from indigenous lake cults or were reshaped later under Buddhist symbolism. Some scholars suggest the dragons were stand-ins for Naga deities, absorbed into Chinese-influenced iconography. Others maintain that the lake spirits were uniquely local and survived any translation attempts by scribes. What remains clear is that villagers never doubted the dragons, regardless of what monks or historians had to say. Another tale spins from the elders' lips: hidden caves in the Kangshan Mountains, where hermits carved chambers by candlelight, filled with statues of stone Buddhas that glow faintly in moonlight. He claims the caves shift positions at night, so intruders cannot find them twice. Children widen their eyes. You wonder if the caves are real, or just the mountain's polite way of encouraging people to stay on marked paths. A quirky tidbit comes from a temple guide who swears that one monk once tamed a tiger by reciting sutras until the beast fell asleep, snoring like a drum. Skeptics might doubt the detail, but even skeptics enjoy a story where the tiger becomes just another sleepy audience member. You follow the elder's gesture as he points to peaks dark against the stars. He speaks of spirits who guard travelers, visible only as flickers of light along the ridges. Some call them ancestors keeping watch. Others call them mischievous sprites, trying to lure wanderers astray. Either way, the advice is the same. When you see a moving light in the fog, offer a bow, then keep walking steadily. Never chase it, never mock it. The mountains listen, and they enjoy jokes less than people do. The night grows colder. Villagers set lanterns afloat on a pond, each flame carrying a wish. Some hope for harvest, some for health, others for marriage or safe travel. The water catches each reflection until the pond seems crowded with stars. You watch a child clap at the sight and shout, "Now the sky has cousins." The elder chuckles. The stars below eat better than the stars above. Humor, once again, keeps spirits near but never frightening. Neutral voice threads in. Myth and ritual often filled gaps where history grew thin. Inscriptions praise kings with divine language, but in daily life it was stories of dragons, spirits, and luminous caves that bound people's imaginations. The blending of Buddhism and native belief created a layered spiritual identity, neither fully imported nor entirely local, but uniquely Dali's. You sit back and listen to a lull in the elders' tales. Frogs croak from the edges of the pond, loud enough to act like percussion. Somewhere a dog barks once, then sighs, deciding it is not worth a second round. The elder clears his throat and finishes with a gentle warning. The clouds above Dali are not only mist, they are veils. Sometimes they hide, sometimes they reveal. But never think they drift for no reason. You feel the weight of his words. The mountains shift in silence. The lake glimmers faintly, and the sky seems to lean closer. In this moment, you understand how a kingdom can survive not just through trade and diplomacy, but through stories that teach patience, respect, and the occasional reminder not to annoy dragons. You leave the firelit circle of the elders' stories and follow a path that winds higher into the mountains. The air grows thinner, colder, the kind that makes you pull your cloak tight and notice every breath. The stars fade behind thick clouds. A wind slips through the pines with a sound like distant hoofbeats. And then, in that hush, you feel it. The storm on the horizon, a fact to steady yourself. By the 13th century, the Mongols under Kublai Khan pressed into the southwest, their campaigns rolling through Yunnan as part of their vast expansion that would knit together the Yuan dynasty. Dali, though remote, could not stay untouched. You pause at a ridge where the view spreads wide, valleys drowned in fog, rivers shining faintly like veins of silver, and beyond them, emptiness that promises movement. Somewhere out there, dust rises from riders who know no obstacle too steep, no wall too high. The Mongols are coming, and the mountains whisper of it before men do. Historians still argue whether Dali resisted actively or whether its rulers calculated survival through surrender. Some accounts suggest Duan Xingji, the last king, negotiated rather than fought, handing over the kingdom with minimal bloodshed. Others propose resistance flickered in pockets, soon stamped out by overwhelming force. The chronicles disagree, leaving you with fog thicker than the clouds around your feet. A quirky tidbit emerges from a traveler's diary. Mongol scouts in Yunnan supposedly tied bells to their horses' tails, the jingling, eerie, and constant, unsettled villagers who swore the sound carried farther than sight, like ghosts announcing themselves long before arrival. Practical? Maybe not. Psychological? Very. And it made villagers mutter that the mountains themselves trembled when the jingling drew near. You walk into a hamlet where doors are bolted, shutters tight. A lone dog whines, too nervous to bark. Fields lie untended, rice stalks bending heavy without hands to harvest. Fear is a harvest of its own. At a gate, you hear whispers. Families deciding whether to stay or flee, whether to pray at the temple or pack their mules. Nobody speaks of fighting. They only speak of enduring. The neutral voice folds in. The Mongols had already subdued much of northern China, Central Asia, and Korea. To them, Yunnan was not a kingdom in the clouds. It was a flank, a route, a stone to step on while building empire. Dali was not the first nor the last to face this storm. You continue along the pass, and the fog thickens until you see shapes that seem like armies. lines of trees, shadows of rocks, ridges marching like columns. The imagination fills gaps before sight does. A snap of a twig makes your pulse leap. Only a rabbit. But in times like these, even rabbits wear enemy shapes for a second. At night, you find shelter in a ruined watchtower. Its walls crumble, its roof long gone, but the stones still hold memory. You trace carvings left by soldiers, arrows, horses, even a crude drawing of a man drinking from a jug, laughing despite everything. Humor survives sieges better than supplies sometimes. A gust carries with it the distant clatter of hooves. Real, not imagined. You hold your breath, and the sound fades, swallowed by mountains. Perhaps it was only a patrol. Perhaps it was history passing close enough for you to feel the vibration. Either way, the silence that follows is heavier than the noise. Below the tower, villagers light a small fire, covering it with pots so the glow doesn't show. They huddle, whispering prayers to dragons, Buddhas, and ancestors alike, hedging their hopes with every power available. One man murmurs that if the clouds love Dali, they'll thicken enough to hide it forever. His wife answers with a thin smile. Clouds drift. Empires don't ask them for directions. As dawn breaks, you step out onto the stones. The horizon glows faintly, but the sky feels heavier, pressed down by unseen riders. The world balances on the edge of a storm. And somewhere deep inside, you realize that for a kingdom in the clouds, even the highest peaks cannot keep history away forever. You step onto the road at first light, and the air tastes of metal and ash, a quiet that carries the weight of approaching hoofbeats. Fields stand unharvested, dew-struck, and still, as if waiting to see who will claim them next. Tracks score the clay in parallel grooves. They are too deep for carts, too straight for village traffic. You follow them because everyone does when history makes ruts. A fact sets the frame. In 1253, Kublai Khan, then a Mongol prince acting under his brother Mongke's authority, leads the campaign that breaks the Dali kingdom. Sources record a swift advance into Yunnan and a surrender that spares the capital catastrophic ruin. Names and dates hold steady, even where voices differ. The climb toward the passes feels shorter today, not because the mountain shrank, but because resolve has. Watchtowers stand with doors open, ladders lowered, signal baskets cold. Villagers stay behind shutters. A dog growls once, then hides under the steps as if it just remembered it has an appointment elsewhere. Fear makes excellent schedules. On a ridge, you hear it at last. The braided sound of an army moving, iron striking iron, leather creaking, bits chiming, men speaking in low, practical voices. The column slides into view like a river made of decisions. Cavalry in layered coats, bows cased, spears held with the careless mastery of people who have practiced until their muscles think faster than they do. Their pace is steady, almost polite. The mountain allows them passage. They return the courtesy by not stumbling. Historians still argue whether Dali's court weighed resistance seriously or saw immediately that defiance meant the kind of silence that erases palaces. Some chronicles hint at skirmishes on approaches, sudden flares quickly smothered. Others say the nobles chose negotiation as soon as Mongol banners topped the first ridge. The fog in the texts thickens where pride would normally write louder. You descend with the column toward the lake. The city reveals itself by degrees, white walls, black trim, roofs like wings. No battle haze clouds the view, only morning mist and the careful geometry of streets. Envoys ride out under flag, plain cloth, no bragging. The lead rider lifts his hand, palm outward, the universal sign for words, not arrows. The Mongol vanguard halts with the precision of a door closing on its exact frame. Someone sneezes. The nearest horse flicks an ear, unimpressed. Even conquest has allergies. A neutral voice sketches the scene that follows from the record. The Duan ruler, named in many sources as Duan Xingji, submits to Kublai's command. The city opens its gates. The palace yields. The kingdom bends rather than shatters. The Mongol command spares Dali large-scale destruction and installs the Duan as a local prince under Yuan oversight, turning the old throne into an administrative seat. In time, Yunnan becomes a province of the Yuan, the Duan clan serving as intermediaries within the new order. You walk beside the envoy party through the gate where guards stand very still, like men who just learned stillness can be a survival skill. Courtyards smell of damp stone and old incense. The palace hall you saw alive with court bustle now holds a quieter company. Mongol officers, Chinese clerks, translators who look like they have rehearsed this exact day for years, and Dali ministers whose eyes never quite settle in one place. The choreography feels ancient and new at once. Tribute ritual rewritten as transfer of sovereignty. A quirky tidbit lives in local hearsay. People later claimed that the Mongol standard planted in the palace yard made a sound at night, a soft thrumming as if the pole hummed with wind from far plateaus. Children said it was the steppe singing to the lake. Adults said it was loose cordage. Both explanations earned nods. If a sound can carry two meanings without breaking, it will. The formal bows begin. A scribe reads titles until the scroll's weight seems to tilt his wrist. Another lists gifts with the stamina of a mountain trail. Horses, saddles, bolts of silk, lacquer, a mirror that returns a face so honestly you want to renegotiate with it. Account books are stacked like small fortresses on the floor. If paper could conquer, the job would be done by lunchtime. Kublai's representative speaks in a voice that's firm without heat. He accepts submission, confirms appointments, requests registers of land and men, and assigns garrisons like pegs along a map. The Dali ministers answer carefully, the way people step on stones in a stream when they do not know how deep the water runs. One asks whether old temple lands will keep their stipends. The officer replies that monasteries are good for order when they are good for order. It is the sort of sentence that sounds like permission until you read it twice. Historians still argue whether Kublai himself entered Dali city or kept to camp while his generals took the formalities. Accounts place him near, command unmistakable, presence debated. The difference matters to biographers more than to the city, which learned either way that the decision had already been made outside its walls. You move through the hall as clerks unfurl maps. Fingers tap ridges you've walked, rivers you've watched turn silver at dusk. Garrison dots appear like new stars, supply depots like moons with schedules. A man with the calm face of someone married to arithmetic requests a census. Another sketches a road widening. Power is many things, but on days like this, it is mostly the ability to make lists and have other people obey them. A servant offers tea that tastes faintly of smoke, as if the leaves overheard rumors while drying. You drink and feel your hands steady. A court poet attempts a couplet about clouds welcoming riders from the north, stumbles, and wisely stops at one line. The room pretends not to notice. Mercy arrives in small social favors. On the palace steps, you watch the exchange of seals. The old stamp, symbol of Dali's sovereign will, is presented with both hands and a face that has practiced looking brave. The new seal arrives like winter, inevitable, crisply cut, indifferent to the weather it brings. A gong sounds, not loud, just enough to teach the moment its shape. A boy in the crowd asks his mother whether the lake will change names. She says lakes are bad with paperwork. Everyone nearby pretends not to smile. The joke is thin, but it keeps a corner of the day from tearing. Humor stitches what protocol cannot. You walk out into the city as word moves faster than footsteps. Shopkeepers lift shutters. Fishermen push boats from the bank because fish still have schedules. A monk hangs a fresh prayer slip that asks for calm seas on a lake that rarely storms. He is hedging hope in all directions. You approve. Near the 3 pagodas, an elder touches stone warmed by new sun and says quietly that towers last longer than flags. He has statistics on his side. You look up at their pale weight and think about nails pinning dragons, about legends that outlive ledgers. The empire can count everything it wants. The stories will keep count their own way. Both tallies matter. By evening, soldiers stack gear under eaves. Grooms curry horses until the animals shine like intent turned into muscle. Clerks share lamp oil and grievances about ink. A captain teaches a recruit how to tie a knot that never slips. The recruit pretends he already knew. Everyone nods. Ceremony continues in 100 little acts that look nothing like ceremony and hold the world together anyway. The lake darkens to polished hematite. Lanterns prick the quay. Somewhere in the palace, a new banner flutters, with the small embarrassment of cloth that does not yet know which way this city breathes. A breeze helps it learn. You stand with the water tapping the stones and realize surrender has a sound. Not a shout, not a sob, but the soft scrape of one order making space for another. Tomorrow will be for tallies, appointments, and road crews that widen passes by inches. Tonight belongs to the simple fact that a kingdom stepped sideways to survive, and the mountains, who have seen worse and better, kept their usual opinion, unchanged. You wake to a city that still looks like Dali, yet feels different. The walls have not shifted, the lake has not drained, the pagodas still lift their pale spires into the clouds. But banners ripple with new symbols, seals press new characters, and voices in the marketplace speak of governors, inspectors, and decrees stamped with the mark of the Yunnan. Continuity on the surface, transformation beneath. A fact is clear. After the surrender of 1253, Yunnan was incorporated into the Yuan dynasty, with the Duan family reduced to local princely administrators under Mongol oversight. The old kingdom no longer steered itself. Its throne became an office chair in a larger empire. You walk the market again, noticing how goods still spill across stalls. Rice, silver, tea bricks, all here as before. But officials in unfamiliar garb now tally weights, levy taxes, and issue licenses. Clerks bend over new registers written in Chinese and Mongolian, adjusting what the old books once said. The rhythm of trade continues, yet the song feels remixed, as if someone replaced half the musicians, but kept the melody recognizable. Historians still argue whether this transition was harsh occupation or pragmatic absorption. Some chronicles emphasize heavy burdens, labor levies, garrisons, strict oversight. Others point out the continuity of local rulers, the survival of temples, and the endurance of village life. Perhaps both are true, depending on whether you stood in a palace hall or a rice paddy. A quirky tidbit survives in village lore. When Yuan officials first arrived, locals supposedly tried to teach them the names of every mountain spirit, warning that paperwork alone would not keep roads safe. The officials nodded solemnly, took notes, and then issued decrees to respect all spirits as recorded. Whether the spirits felt respected is an open question. You wander into a temple courtyard where incense curls upward as steadily as before. Monks chant, their voices unchanged, though new patrons in Yuan uniforms watch with a mix of curiosity and calculation. The 3 pagodas stand solid, untouched by political swaps. You realize that for faith, dynasties are passing weather. The clouds move, but the mountains stay. Along Erhai Lake, fishermen mend nets and mutter about taxes. A boy throws stones at the water, laughing as ripples chase each other. Daily life insists on being itself, stubborn in its ordinariness. Even conquerors cannot tax a child's laughter, at least not yet. You pass a construction site where laborers widen a road. Yuan overseers bark orders, but the workers joke among themselves, competing to see whose shovel hits the loudest clang on rock. One man proclaims he's discovered a vein of stubborn stone, harder than Mongol helmets. The overseer frowns, the crew chuckles, the joke lingers. Humor, as always, is empire-proof. The neutral voice explains. Yuan administration formalized Yunnan into a province, building roads and postal stations to knit it into the empire. New fortresses rose on ridges. New markets linked caravans from Central Asia to Southeast Asia. Dali was no longer the crossroads of its own choosing. It was a junction in someone else's map. At night, you sit by the lake and listen. Boats creak, crickets rasp. The city lights glow faintly, lanterns strung across courtyards where clerks still argue over ledgers and monks still debate sutras. The balance has shifted, but the pattern holds. Words, rituals, trade, and prayers continue, though the banners above them have changed color. An old man approaches with a basket of fish. He shrugs at your gaze and says, "Kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall, but fish still swim." He chuckles, then adds, "And they still smell," which proves nothing changes enough. The wisdom is plain, the humor earthy, and you find yourself nodding. The night wind brushes the pagodas, carrying incense, smoke, and the soft sigh of a city learning how to belong to 2 worlds at once, the memory of its own sovereignty and the reality of being a province. Dali dissolves into the mist, not erased, but folded carefully into another empire's ledger. You walk the old road at dawn, the same stones that once bore envoys, caravans, and regiments of careful decisions. The mountains hold their shapes like long thoughts. Erhai turns its face to the sky and copies whatever the clouds decide. The city behind you breathes in ordinary ways. Ropes creak, kettles sigh, shutters lift. But the breath belongs to a province now, not a crown. Even so, the rhythm feels familiar, as if the years have learned to hum the same tune in a new key. You turn along a terrace where rice shoots stand like green calligraphy written on water. A farmer lifts his head, nods, and returns to the strokes that feed houses. He does not measure his day in dynasties. He measures it in furrows. The road remembers more banners than he does, and both are fine with the arrangement. A fact steadies the morning. The 3 pagodas of Chongsheng Temple still stand at Dali, their foundations reaching back to the 9th and 10th centuries, long before the surrender you watched, and long after it. Stone holds its own calendar. The towers do not ask who governs the ledger. They ask whether the ground will carry them one more season. So far, yes. You step into a workshop where a carver coaxes clouds from wood. His hands have the patience of weather. On his bench lie patterns older than names, spirals, waves, crane feathers, lotus seeds. He learned them from someone who learned them from someone who did not write much down because hands do the writing better. A boy sweeps shavings into a fragrant drift and announces he will one day carve a dragon so relaxed it forgets to storm. The carver says that would bankrupt local umbrella sellers. Economics joins mythology without embarrassment. Historians still argue whether Dali's choice to bend preserved the core of its culture or only delayed a deeper erasure. Some see prudence that saved temples and language. Others see a quiet narrowing of the horizon under new administrators. The archive offers evidence for both readings, which is another way of saying the archive tells the truth of its author's worries. You pass a shrine where paper flags flick in a breeze that carries lamp smoke and lake cold. Inside, a monk mends a sutra binding and hums in a meter that fits walking. He nods toward a shelf of local miracle tales, then toward a stack of fiscal orders tied in tidy string. 2 wings, he says. If one tears, you fly in circles. Practical theology comes with diagrams. Along the lake shore, you hear a bell that is not quite a bell. It is a mule's harness, but your feet remember caravans, so the sound elongates into the past. Tea still travels. Silver still shines in small, persuasive weights. Roots braid, unbraid, braid again. The mountains like their ropes neat, traders oblige. You run your palm along a post worn smooth, where loads were lifted and set down until the wood learned to be kind. A quirky tale floats off the water. Some locals insist the pagodas hum at night when the wind blows from precisely the west-northwest, a low note that settles geese on the lake and quiets babies in their sleep. Skeptics say it is just air slipping the right way around carved corners. Parents say they do not care about the physics as long as bedtime works. The pagodas remain discreet on the matter. You climb to a viewpoint that reads the city like a map. New offices sit where old halls stood, but the street grid still remembers the hands that set its first lines. A teacher leads children in a recitation, a poem about terraces stepping up to meet clouds. One boy adds a line about clouds filing permits before they touch crops. The teacher fails not to smile. Civics and weather find common grammar. Neutral voice folds the wider arc. After Yuan came Ming, whose armies finished the conquest of Yunnan by 1382, setting new garrisons and appointing hereditary guardians to keep roads and taxes obedient. Administrations changed, villages recalibrated. The local Duan line faded from sovereignty to memory, while Bai communities kept markets talking and temples breathing. Dali remained important, but the center of gravity lived elsewhere. You follow a wall where steles lean like tired librarians. Inscriptions praise repairs to bridges, donations of grain, and the astonishing virtue of men who liked their adjectives. Nearby, a storyteller sharpens his knife on a peg and begins a tale about a general who once asked the mountain for directions and received rain instead. The audience nods. The mountain's answers are famously literal. At a quay, fishermen haul nets and complain that taxes are heavier when the wind is light. A clerk taking notes explains that he does not control the wind. The fishermen explain they do not control the fish. Both parties agree that control is over-advertised. They settle for a schedule. You suspect most peace is made of such bargains. The day tilts toward gold. Incense wavers from a door you recognize, and chanting drops through the air like a hand smoothing rumpled cloth. You stand with your palm on cool stone and let the city pass through you. Shouts, hooves, hymn, laughter, ledger, lullaby. If you squeeze your eyes almost shut, banners of every century fly at once and refuse to quarrel. Memory is good at truce. You take the road back toward the terrace where you began. The farmer has finished his row. The boy in the workshop has invented 3 ways to tame a polite dragon. The monk has repaired 2 bindings and 1 mood. The lake has rehearsed the sky until both are satisfied. You stand between towers and water and understand the shape the years have taken. Not an erasure, not a triumph, but a continuity with seams you can trace if you have time and good light. If anyone asks what survived, you point to stone that keeps standing, to markets that keep talking, to roads that keep returning to themselves. You also point to jokes. Empires untie many knots. Jokes retie them in friendlier ways. Night arranges itself. Lanterns hum. Frogs start up their forecast. Somewhere a scribe sets down his brush and wonders, as people always do, if the word he chose was exactly the right one. You answer him across the centuries by walking the road again tomorrow, which is a kind of footnote the mountain knows how to read. Let the road fade behind you now, slow as mist slipping through the cedars. You keep your pace small. You keep your breath even. The lake lies to your left like a long silver eyelid closing, each ripple a gentler sentence than the last. The pagodas hold their posture against the sky, and you feel how a still shape can quiet the air around it, how stone persuades time to walk softly. The terraces step down and down until the green becomes a dark, and the dark becomes a hush, and the hush becomes a place you can rest. You pass the gate with its familiar curve, and the wood remembers your hand from earlier. Warm grain, cool iron, a small hinge sound. The city breathes behind walls. A bell counts the hour as if to remind you that hours are only folded moments, easy to smooth with a thumb. On a distant path, a mule bell rings once and then, not again, like a thought you decide to let go. The wind chooses a direction and stays with it. Clouds drift without asking permissions. The mountain approves. If the day brought questions, let them stack on the table for morning. If the names and years still whisper, let them soften into shapes that are pleasant to hold but easy to set down. Imagine a low room with paper windows and a bowl of warm tea within reach. Imagine the floor steady under you, the air easy, the lamp gentle. The world you walked remains just outside, complete, patient, unchanged by your closing eyes. Sleep comes as a quiet ferry across a narrow water. You step on without hurry. The boat moves without wake. The far shore is close enough to hear the reeds. You arrive already resting. The oar lifts. The lake goes still. The end, sweet dreams.